You want to know the strangest thing about that morning? It was boring. I've told this story maybe 100 times now, and that's always the part nobody believes. They lean in, they want the chaos right away, they want the noise. But the truth is, for the first 3 hours, nothing happened at all. Just the ordinary kind of London day where the sky can't decide what it wants to be. My name's Margaret. People call me Maggie. Back then I ran a little coffee cart on the corner where the Park Road meets the avenue, just down from where the mounted guards sit on their horses for the tourists. I'd been working that same corner for 9 years. Rain, shine, strikes, royal weddings didn't matter. I was there with my urns and my paper cups and my crossword folded into my apron pocket. So I knew that corner. I knew it the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. And that morning, I swear to you, there was nothing. Let me set it up properly, because the setting matters. It always matters more than people think. It was a Thursday in late September. That in-between time of year where the tourists thin out a bit but haven't gone home yet. The leaves on the big plane trees were just starting to go, a few yellow ones letting go and drifting down onto the wet pavement. There'd been rain overnight. You could still smell it. That clean, slightly metal smell that London gets after a wet night, before all the engines and the crowds cover it back up again. I'd been there since 6. Setting up's the quiet bit I actually love. Just me and the pigeons and the road sweepers and the odd jogger with their headphones in. The sky was that flat pale gray, the kind that doesn't promise rain but doesn't promise sun either, sort of sits there, waiting. By 7:30, the first proper crowd started gathering near the guard. There were 2 of them on horseback that day, the way there usually were. Big black horses perfectly still, and the young soldiers up top in their dark uniforms and the helmets with the long plumes. Tourists love them. You'd see a whole family stop dead in the middle of the path, phones up, kids pointing, somebody's grand saying, "Ooh, look at that, isn't he handsome?" and the soldier wouldn't move a muscle. Not a flicker. That's the whole point, isn't it? They train them to be like statues. I'll be honest, after 9 years I barely noticed them anymore. They were just part of the furniture to me, like the lamp posts. But there was one of them I did know a little, by sight anyway. His name, I found out later, was Trooper Adam Fenwick, 23 years old. From somewhere up north, you could tell by the way the few words he ever said to me came out flat and warm at the same time. He'd been on that corner most mornings for about 4 months by then. And the thing about Adam, the thing that made me notice him when I didn't notice the others, was that he'd say good morning to me. Now they're not supposed to. When they're on ceremonial duty, they're meant to stay silent, eyes front, the whole performance. And he was when the crowds were watching. Stone still. But early on, before the tourists came, when it was just me wheeling my cart into place and him riding up to take his post, he'd catch my eye and he'd give me this tiny nod. And once, just once, when nobody else was about, he'd murmured morning under his breath, barely moving his lips, like a kid getting away with something in church. I'd laughed, he hadn't, but I saw the corner of his mouth go. After that it became our little thing. I'd wheel up, I'd say morning, soldier, nice and quiet, and I'd get the tiny nod. That was the whole conversation most days. Took about 1 second. But you'd be amazed how much 1 second can mean when it's the same second every day. That Thursday he gave me the nod same as always. I remember thinking he looked tired. Bit pale maybe. But then who isn't tired at 7:30 on a gray Thursday? I gave him his morning, soldier, and got on with my urns. That was the last ordinary thing that happened. The crowd built up like it always did. By 10, there was a good 30 or 40 people in a loose horseshoe around the 2 horses. Coach tour, I think, by the look of them. Matching little lanyards. A guide with a folded umbrella she kept using as a pointer even though it wasn't raining. I was busy. Thursday late mornings a decent trade. Coffees, teas, a few of those wrapped flapjacks I used to do. I had a queue 4 deep, and I wasn't really looking at anything except the next cup and the next handful of coins. So I want to be honest with you about what I actually saw. versus what I worked out later, versus what the news told everybody afterwards. Because they all got mixed up in my head for a long time, and it took me years to untangle the real memory from the story. What I actually saw first was a man. Not running, that's the thing people always assume. They think you'd notice the danger because it'd be sprinting at you with its teeth out. It wasn't like that. This man was walking, ordinary clothes, dark jacket, jeans, a rucksack on one shoulder, the other strap hanging loose. Maybe 40, maybe younger. He had his hood half up even though it wasn't cold or raining. And the only reason I clocked him at all was because he stopped. He stopped at the low railing near the trees about 20 yards from the horses, and he set the rucksack down, gently, the way you'd put down something you cared about, and then he didn't pick it back up. He just sort of stepped away from it, backwards almost, looking at it the whole time. I remember the cup in my hand. I remember the steam off it. I remember thinking, in that completely useless way your brain works, he's forgotten his bag, somebody should tell him. That's it, that's the whole warning I got. A man putting down a bag and walking off without it. I didn't shout, I didn't do anything. I want that on the record because it's mattered to me all these years that I tell it true. I did nothing. I went back to my cue. A woman wanted oat milk and I didn't have oat milk, and I was explaining I didn't have oat milk. But somebody else saw. Here's where it stops being my story for a minute and becomes his. Adam Fenwick was up on that horse, eyes front, doing his statue act for 40 tourists. And from where he sat, he had a view I didn't. He was up high. He could see over the heads of the crowd, down the line of the railing, all the way to the trees. He saw the man put the bag down too. But he saw something I couldn't have. He saw the man's face as he walked away. And whatever was in that face, I never found out exactly. He could never quite put words to it afterwards. It was enough. Enough that a 23-year-old lad who was trained, drilled, hammered into the idea that you do not move, you do not speak, you do not break the performance no matter what, broke it. Now you have to understand what that means. These soldiers, the ceremonial ones, the whole point of them is the discipline. There are videos all over the internet of tourists doing the daftest things to try and make them flinch, screaming in their faces, waving things about, and they don't move. It's almost inhuman. It's designed to be inhuman. The stillness is the message. We do not break. And Adam Fenwick broke it on purpose, in about 2 seconds flat. The first thing anybody heard was his voice. I didn't catch the words at that point. I was too far, too much noise, the oat milk woman. But the people near him caught it, and they've all said roughly the same. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. That's what they all remember. He used this enormous, flat, parade ground voice, the kind that's built to carry across a field full of marching men, and he said something like, "Everybody move back from the railing. Now, move back toward me, keep moving." A guard who hadn't said a word in 4 months of mornings suddenly talking, loudly, to everyone. You can imagine the confusion. Half of them thought it was part of the show. A few people actually laughed. There's always a few who think everything's for their entertainment. Somebody near the front lifted their phone higher to film it, because of course they did. And Adam, and this is the bit that still gets me, every time Adam didn't get angry at them for not understanding. He didn't have time and he didn't waste it. He just said it again, and this time, the tour guide with the umbrella, bless her, she caught on. She must have. Because she started physically herding her group backwards, arms out wide, that folded umbrella now sweeping people along like a sheepdog. The horse felt it before the people did, I think. Animals do. The big black thing started shifting its weight, ears going flat, and Adam was holding it steady with one hand while he kept that voice going with the other half of him. Move back, keep coming, don't stop. I want to slow right down here. Because this next part happened in seconds, but I've spent so many years turning it over that in my memory it goes on forever, like a held breath. I'd finally noticed. The oat milk woman had wandered off and I'd looked up because of the voice. this booming voice cutting across the corner, and my first thought, same as everyone's, was, what's the soldier doing? Soldiers don't talk. And I saw him up there, twisted half round in the saddle, one arm out, herding the crowd back with the sheer force of his shouting. And I followed where he was facing, and I saw the bag again. The rucksack. Sitting by the railing with nobody near it now, because the crowd was peeling away from it, backwards toward me, toward the cart. And that's when it landed in me. The cold, right down the middle of me, like someone had poured the contents of my own ice bucket down my spine. Because I'd seen the man set it down and walk away, and I'd thought somebody should tell him, and I'd gone back to my cups. And now a soldier was screaming at 40 strangers to get away from it. I didn't decide to move. My legs decided. I came round the front of the cart so fast I knocked the whole stack of paper cups flying, and they went everywhere, this little snowstorm of white cups bouncing across the wet pavement, and I started waving people toward me too, into the wider part of the path, away from the trees, away from the railing. There was a little girl, I'll never not see her, maybe 5, red coat. She dropped some kind of toy and she'd stopped, right out in the open, twisting back to grab it, and her mum was 3 steps ahead pulling on her other hand, not realizing the kid was anchored to the spot by a dropped toy, and nobody was close enough. Except the horse. Adam moved the horse. I don't know how to explain to you how strange it is to watch a ceremonial guard, who is supposed to be a statue, suddenly ride. Not a gentle walk. He turned that animal and put it between the little girl and the bag, this huge black wall of horse, and he leaned down out of the saddle further than I'd have thought a person could lean without falling, and he had a fistful of the back of the kid's red coat, and he just lifted, hauled her right up off the ground. The mum screamed. Of course she screamed. From where she stood it must have looked like a soldier was snatching her child. She didn't have the picture yet. None of them really had the picture except Adam, who'd seen the man's face, and me, who'd seen the bag go down. He didn't keep the girl, that's the thing. He didn't gallop off with her like some film. He swung her in one motion straight into her mother's arms, the mum staggering back with the weight of her. And in the same breath he was already turning the horse again, putting himself back between all of them and the railing. Between everyone and the bag. People ask me sometimes why he didn't just ride away too, once the crowd was moving, once the girl was safe. Why does a soldier put himself between 40 strangers and a thing that might go off, when nobody would have blamed him for getting clear? I've thought about that more than almost anything in my life. And I don't think it was a decision. I think that's the thing people get wrong about it. They picture some noble moment where he waded up and chose to be a hero. I don't believe it was like that at all. I think 4 months of standing on a corner being a statue, and however many years of training before that, all of it had built one single thing into him so deep it wasn't even a thought anymore. You hold the post. Whatever comes, you hold the post. So he held it. The crowd was a proper mess by now. Funneling back down the path, some of them finally frightened, some of them still confused, a couple still filming, and a kind of low rising sound coming off all of them, this collective animal noise of fear that's like nothing else. I was screaming at them too by then. Get back, keep going into the open. My voice has never sounded like that before or since. And up the road, and this is when I knew it was real, properly real. When the last little hope that it was all a misunderstanding fell out from under me, I heard the sirens. Somebody had called it in. I found out later it was the tour guide, the umbrella woman. She'd had the presence of mind to be on the phone the whole time she was herding, telling them a man left a bag, telling them the soldiers clearing the area. Calm as anything. People are extraordinary, ordinary people. The sirens were still a way off. You know how it is in the city, you hear them and you can't tell if they're coming to you or going past. But they were getting louder. And Adam was up on that horse, alone now, everyone else streaming away behind him, and he had his back to all of us and his face to the bag. He was the last thing between it and the rest of us. And I stood there, with my cups all over the floor and my urns hissing and forgotten behind me, and I watched the back of a 23-year-old who used to whisper morning to me like a kid in church, holding his post on a gray Thursday, while the whole world started to scream. The siren stopped being a maybe and turned into a fact. Two cars came up the avenue the wrong way, mounting the curb, and a van behind them. People in those high-vis jackets that you only ever see when something's gone badly wrong. They didn't get out slow. They came out of the doors already moving, already shouting, and the shouting joined onto Adam's shouting, and the crowd's noise, and somewhere a car alarm had started up for no reason anyone could see. And the whole corner that had been so boring 3 hours earlier was suddenly the loudest place I had ever stood in my life. A policeman grabbed my arm, just appeared at my elbow and took hold of me, firm but not rough, and said something I didn't catch the first time. He had to say it twice. "Behind the line, love. You need to be behind the line." What line, I thought. There wasn't a line. There was a coffee cart and 100 frightened people and a soldier on a horse. But they make one fast, the police. That's their gift, I think, the thing they're for. Where there's nothing, they put up a shape, an order, a this side safe, that side not, and people grab onto it like a rail in the dark. Two of them were stringing that blue and white tape across the path. Others were pushing the crowd, the same direction Adam had been pushing them, but with more bodies and more authority behind it now. The herd finally started moving properly. You could feel the relief of it, even in the middle of the fear, the relief of someone in charge. I got pulled back. I went. I'm not proud of how glad I was to go. I'd been so brave for about 90 seconds, and the second a man in uniform told me I could stop being brave, I stopped, and my legs went to water under me, and I had to put a hand on a lamp post. But I kept watching. I never stopped watching. Adam was still up there. That's what I couldn't get over, even then, even with everything happening. They were moving everyone. The whole point of all those uniforms and all that tape was get the people away from the bag. And the man closest to the bag, the one with the most reason in the world to ride off, was the one who hadn't moved an inch. I saw an officer go up to him, one of the high-vis ones, shouting up at him, gesturing back down the road, the universal "come on, get out of it." And I saw Adam shake his head, just once, and say something back short and turn the horse a few feet not away across. Side on. Putting the great length of the animal between the bag and the path where there were still stragglers, the slow ones, the old fellow with the stick, the woman who dropped her phone and gone back for it like an idiot, all the people who don't move fast when fast is the only thing that matters. He was using the horse as a wall, a living wall, and he was standing it in the gap. The officer didn't argue long. There wasn't time to argue. I think he understood what Adam was doing, and I think part of him hated it and part of him was grateful, the way I was grateful for the policeman who told me to step back. We all just take the bravery of the person next to us and we lean on it. That's what a crowd is, really. A pile of people leaning on the few who won't run. Then came the quiet. I want to tell you about the quiet because nobody ever expects it. The bomb squad arrived, the proper ones. You know them when you see them. There's a particular kind of slow that only very dangerous things move at. Everyone else had been a blur of speed, and now these people came and they were slow, deliberate, every step placed, and somehow that was more frightening than all the running. Because their slowness told you the truth. It said, this is real, and we are not going to rush at a real one. And as they moved up, the police pushed everyone back further. And further, and the noise sort of drained out of the corner like water out of a sink. The car alarm got switched off. The crowd, now safely back, went from screaming to murmuring to nearly silent, because the further you get from danger, the more you can afford to be quiet and watch. So it went still. That terrible, electric kind of still, where a whole city street holds its breath. I have never heard London that quiet, not on Christmas morning, not at 4 in the morning. There were maybe 200 people behind that tape by then, and you could have heard a coin drop. And in the middle of all that quiet was the bag, and the slow, careful people in their heavy suits going toward it. And still, Adam Fenwick on his horse, off to the side now but not gone, not gone, watching the thing he'd stood guard over for what must have felt to him like 100 years. They were trying to wave him back too. The bomb squad, I could see it. And finally, he went. He walked the horse backwards, slow, never quite turning his back on it until he was level with the police line, with us, with the living. And I'll tell you, the second he crossed that line, a sound went up from the crowd, not a cheer. It wasn't the time for a cheer, and they knew it. It was lower than that. A kind of long exhaled relief and fear and gratitude all bundled into one breath from 200 chests at once, because we'd all been watching him, every one of us, the soldier in the gap. And when he finally came back to our side of the line, it was like the whole street could breathe again. He didn't react to it, eyes front, statue again, but I was close enough now, close enough to see his hands, and his hands were shaking. The reins were going in his grip, this fine tremble, and he was holding them tighter to make it stop, and it wouldn't stop. He was a statue from the neck up and a frightened young man from the wrists down, and only the few of us near enough could see it. I think that's the bravest thing I've ever seen, not the riding into it, the standing still afterward, shaking, and not letting 200 people see you shake. Then it went wrong. I've gone back and forth 1,000 times on whether I should tell this part the way it happened or soften it. People want their hero stories clean. They want the bag to be made safe and everyone to go home and the soldier to get a medal and the credits to roll. And a lot of it did happen like that in the end, but not all of it. And if I tell it clean, I'd be telling you a lie, and I promised myself a long time ago I'd only ever tell this true. So the truth. It went off. Not the big one. I need to say that fast because I've watched people's faces drop when I say it went off and they think the worst. It wasn't the worst. The squad were good, they were so good, and most of what could have happened didn't. But something in that bag was on a timer or a trigger or just old and unstable. Nobody ever told me exactly which, and while they were working on it, it gave. There was no warning. That's the thing about them. In the films, there's a beep and a countdown and a wire to cut. In life, there's nothing, and then there's everything. The sound, I can't describe the sound. People try and they say like a thunderclap, and it's nothing like thunder. Thunder rolls, and this didn't roll, it just was. A single flat, enormous slap of pressure that went straight through me, through the lamp post, through the ground. I felt it in my teeth. I felt it in my chest like a punch from the inside. Every window in the cafe behind me went at once, this great crystal crash, and a parked car's alarm started up and then died as the car itself jumped on its wheels. And then the strangest second of my life, where I couldn't hear anything at all. Total silence, total ringing silence, while in front of me I could see 200 people's mouths open in screams I couldn't hear, see them going down, see dust and leaves and bits of railing thrown up into that gray sky in a slow brown cloud, and no sound. Just the ring. I was on the ground. I don't remember going down. I was just suddenly looking up at the underside of my own coffee cart, which had tipped, and an urn was rolling past my face, leaking warm coffee onto the pavement, and I thought, clear as a bell in the middle of the deaf ringing, I'll have to clean all this up. The mind does the daftest things. The hearing came back in pieces. First the ring, then the ring with screaming underneath it, far away, like screaming heard through a wall. Then all at once, full volume, the whole world rushing back in sirens, screaming, the police shouting, "Stay down, stay down," secondary, watch for a secondary, car alarms. Somebody crying that high broken way, glass still falling somewhere in little tinkles. I got up onto my hands. I didn't mean to be a hero, I want to be clear, I just couldn't lie there. I got up, and the first thing I looked for, the very first thing, before I even checked my own self for damage, was the gap. Was the horse. Was him. The dust was thick where the bag had been. The squad, God help them, those slow, careful, brave people, they'd taken the brunt of it, they'd been the closest, and I'm told, and I believe it, that the way they'd set themselves up, the shields and the angles and all the things they know that we don't, That's the only reason it wasn't far, far worse. They knew their job. They did their job. Some of them paid for it. I won't pretend they didn't. There were people hurt that day who shouldn't have been hurt, and I think about them too, not just the soldier everyone remembers. But the blast had gone mostly forward and up, away from the police line, away from us, because of where they'd positioned it, and because of where Adam had spent those long minutes forcing everybody to stand. Back, keep coming, don't stop, all that shouting, all that hurting with one arm while he held a panicking horse with the other. Every foot he'd pushed the crowd was a foot further from the thing when it gave. He'd bought distance with his voice, and distance is everything. Distance is the whole difference between a story people tell and a story nobody lives to tell. I found him. The horse was down. I'll be honest about that. That beautiful black animal was on its side in the road, and it wasn't getting up, and I'm not going to dress that up. It had stood in the gap same as its rider, and it didn't walk away. I cried about the horse for weeks afterward, when I'd stopped being able to cry about anything else. There's something about an animal that doesn't understand why, that just stands where it's told because a person it trusts told it to. I still can't think about the horse. But Adam was moving. He'd been thrown clear, or half thrown, or he'd come off as it went down. I don't know, and he never knew either. He was on the ground a few yards from the horse, and he was moving, trying to push himself up on one arm. His helmet gone, that plume gone, and there was blood. There was a lot of blood on the side of his head, down his collar, and his uniform that had been so perfect that morning was torn open down one side. He looked about 12 years old without the helmet. He looked like somebody's kid, which he was, everybody's somebody's kid. And I want you to know what he did, lying there, bleeding, deaf surely like the rest of us. The first thing he did, the absolute first thing before he tried to stand, before he checked his own self. He turned his head to look at the crowd. He was counting us. I swear to you that's what he was doing. He couldn't have known names or numbers, but he turned his bleeding head to look back at the police line, at the 200 people he'd pushed back there, and I watched his face as he saw that they were standing. Most of them. Shaken, screaming, down on the ground some of them, but moving, alive, behind the line where he'd put them. And his head went back down onto the road, and his eyes closed, and I understood in that moment that he'd been holding on just for that, just to see, to know the post had held. I started crawling toward him before I'd decided to. Over the broken glass, cutting my hands to ribbons and not feeling a thing for hours, crawling toward the soldier who used to whisper morning to me like a secret, because somebody had to get to him and I was the closest one standing, or the closest one moving anyway, and I was absolutely not, going to let that boy be alone on the ground. I never reached him. I want to be honest about that too, because it would make a nicer story if I'd got to him and held his hand and he'd opened his eyes and said something. That's how I'd have written it if I was making it up. But I'm not making it up, so here's what really happened. I got about halfway across that broken road, on my cut-up hands and knees, and a paramedic got there first. Of course she did. That's their job, and they're faster than a 53-year-old woman crawling over glass. She came past me at a run, this small, wiry woman with a bag and two more behind her, and they were on him before I'd covered another yard. And one of them, a young lad, younger than Adam by the look of him, put his hand flat on my shoulder, gentle, and said, "We've got him. You did your bit. Let us have him now." You did your bit. I hadn't done anything, but I let them have him. I sat back on my heels in the middle of the wreckage of my own corner, the corner I'd known for 9 years like my own kitchen in the dark, and I watched 4 strangers fight for the life of a boy I knew well enough to say good morning to, and not one thing more than that. It's a funny kind of grief, that, grieving for someone you didn't really know. People said to me afterward, "But you barely knew him, Maggie, like that should make it smaller." It didn't make it smaller. I think sometimes it's the small connections that cut the deepest because they're so pure. There was nothing complicated between me and Adam Fenwick. No history, no falling out, no debts. Just 9 seconds a day, morning, soldier, and a tiny nod. You can love a person across a gap like that. I think maybe it's the cleanest kind of loving there is. The hours after are a blur, and I won't pretend to remember them in order. I remember a foil blanket round my shoulders and not knowing how it got there. I remember a different policeman, an older one, sitting me on a step and asking me what I'd seen, and me telling him about the man with the rucksack, the dark jacket, the hood half up, the way he set the bag down gentle like it mattered to him. And the policeman writing it all down and not once making me feel like I should have shouted sooner. Though I did feel that. I felt it for a long time. Somebody should tell him. 3 hours I'd been on that corner being bored, and when it counted I thought somebody should tell him and went back to my cups. I said that to the older policeman. I couldn't help it, it came out of me. I saw him put it down and I didn't do anything. And he stopped writing and he looked at me and he said something I've held onto ever since. He said, "Love, you didn't know." He did. That's the difference between you and him, and it's the only difference. He'd had the training that let him know. You hadn't, don't you dare carry that. I've tried not to. Some days I manage it. They got the corner cleared and cordoned and I got sent home, eventually, in a car, with a stranger's foil blanket I never gave back. I've still got it, actually. Bottom of a drawer. I couldn't throw it away and I couldn't tell you why. And for 2 days, I didn't know if he was alive. You have to understand, I wasn't family. I wasn't even a proper friend. I was a coffee woman who said good morning to him. Nobody was going to ring me with news, so I did what everybody did. I watched it on the telly like a member of the public, which is what I was, even though I'd been close enough to be cut by the same glass. The news was wall to wall. You'll remember it if you're old enough. The gray footage from the phones, because of course they'd filmed it, all those people lifting their phones, and thank God some of them did because it's how the world saw what he did. There's a clip, you've probably seen it, the one where he leans down off the horse and hauls the little girl up by the back of her red coat and swings her into her mother's arms. 30 seconds long. It went round the entire planet. They played it that much I started to hate it, even though it was true, even though it was the best thing I ever saw a person do. It got worn smooth from being played, like a stone in a river. They turned it into a thing, and the thing wasn't the same as the moment. The moment had dust in it and screaming and the smell of coffee on wet pavement and a tremble in a young man's hands. The clip had none of that. The clip was clean. I told you people want it clean. But here's the news I was actually waiting for in among all of that. On the second night, a doctor at a press thing, a tired woman in scrubs reading off a card. He was alive. Critical, they said. A long road, they said, but alive. I sat on my own settee, and I cried the way I hadn't been able to cry for 2 days. Great, ugly, heaving sobs on my own, over a boy I'd said maybe 100 words to in 4 months. My neighbor banged on the wall thinking something was wrong. Something was. Something was very wrong and very right all at once, and I didn't have the words for it then, and I'm not sure I do now. He lived. I'll give you that flat and plain because you've earned it after all this. Trooper Adam Fenwick lived. It wasn't quick and it wasn't easy and it wasn't clean. He lost the hearing in one ear for good. He's got a scar that runs from his hairline down past his cheekbone, a long pale seam, and a hip that aches when it's about to rain, which in this country is always. He didn't ride again, not on duty. The kind of injuries he had, they don't put you back up on a horse on a public corner. That chapter of his life closed the morning it opened too wide. I know all this because, and this is the part I still can't quite believe even now, I got to meet him. Properly, I mean, sitting down, both of us out of uniform. Well, he was out of uniform, I was never in one. It was months later. He'd done his recovering, mostly the part they let you do in private. And somebody, I never found out who, one of the family maybe, or one of the regiment people who'd been collecting all the witness accounts, somebody had read what I'd said to the older policeman that day. The bit about the morning soldier, the bit about the nod. And they'd told him there'd been a coffee woman on the corner who used to say good morning and who'd crawled across the glass toward him. And one ordinary Tuesday I got a letter. A real one, handwritten. the writing a bit shaky on one side like the hand wasn't fully back to itself, asking if the coffee lady from the corner would let him buy her a cup of tea for a change. Said he reckoned he owed me about 4 months of mornings. We met in a quiet little cafe not near the park. Neither of us could have sat near the park. I knew him straight away, scar and all, though he looked older than 23 now. Something in the eyes. You don't come back from a thing like that the same age you went in. And he stood up when I came in. I told him not to with his hip, but he did anyway, because somebody'd raised him right. And he stuck out his hand and he said, in that flat, warm northern voice I'd only ever heard whisper one word. "Morning, Maggie." It was 3 in the afternoon. And I laughed and I cried at the same time, which I'd been doing a lot of by then, and I took his hand, and that was that. That's how it began, the real friendship, the one that lasted, backwards, after the worst day. We did our knowing each other in the wrong order. The 100 mornings of nods first, then the explosion, and only then, last of all, the actual hello. We talked for 3 hours in that cafe. I'm not going to give you all of it because some of it was his and I'll keep his. But I'll give you the bit you've been waiting for because I asked him. Of course I asked him. Everybody asked him. The newspapers had asked him with their cameras and their clever questions, and he'd never really answered, just gone stiff and polite the way they're trained to, and they'd printed modest war hero stays silent or some such rubbish. But I wasn't a newspaper. I was the coffee woman. So over the second pot of tea, I asked him the only thing I ever really wanted to know. Why didn't you ride away? When the girl was safe, when the crowd was moving, when the police were there and the bomb squad were coming, and not one living soul would have blamed a young lad for getting himself clear. Why did you stay in the gap? And he was quiet for a long time. He turned his cup round and round on the saucer. And then he said, and I've never forgotten a word of it, I went home and wrote it down that same night so I'd have it exactly. He said, I didn't stay because I was brave. Everybody keeps saying brave and it makes my skin crawl. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. My hands wouldn't stop. I stayed because. And he stopped, and he looked out the window at a perfectly ordinary street. Because that's the whole of it, isn't it? The job. People look at us standing on those corners and they think it's daft. A man dressed up like a toy soldier, not allowed to move, not allowed to talk, while tourists shout in his face. They think the not moving is the silly part. But the not moving is the whole thing. It's a promise. Every morning you climb up there, you're making the same promise to every single person who walks past, even though not one of them knows you've made it. You're saying, nothing's going to come through me to get to you. Not while I'm here. And you don't get to keep that promise only on the easy days. That's not a promise, that's a costume. You keep it on the one day it actually means something, or you never meant it at all. And then he picked his tea back up, like he hadn't just said the truest thing I'd ever heard, and he asked me how the cart was getting on. I'd packed it in by then. Couldn't go back to the corner, he understood. He never said you should go back. He just nodded. He was always good at the nod. So that's the story, the real one, dust and all. People remember the 30-second clip. The boy on the horse, the little girl in the red coat swung to safety. And it's a good thing to remember. I'd never tell you it wasn't. But it was always the smaller half of what happened. The half that filmed nicely. The bigger half didn't film. The bigger half was a frightened young man with shaking hands deciding, in a city gone silent, that a promise nobody had heard him make was worth keeping anyway. Standing in a gap. Being the last thing between a quiet gray morning and the people behind him, who'd never know his name, who'd go home and have their tea and never once think about the lad who'd put himself between them and the dark. That's the thing about the ones who hold the post. The whole point of them doing it right is that you never find out they did it at all. The disasters that don't happen don't have clips. The ones who save you most are usually the ones you walk straight past every single morning without a glance. I gave Adam a glance for 4 months. Morning soldier. It's the only thing I ever did right that I'm sure of. So if you take one thing from all this, and you've been good, you've sat through the whole of it, take this. Tomorrow, on your way to wherever you're going, there'll be somebody standing still while you walk past. A guard, a nurse on a night shift, somebody you've decided is just part of the furniture, just a lamp post just there. And you'll have it in you, the same 9 seconds I had, to look at them like they're a person, and to say good morning and to mean it. Say it. You never know which of them is keeping a promise you'll never hear about. You never know which morning is going to turn out to be the one that mattered. I didn't.